The rain came down in relentless waves across the sprawling grounds of the Whitmore estate, hammering the stone walkways and washing the manicured gardens into a blur of gray and green. Inside the sleek, modern home built of glass and steel, Caleb Whitmore stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his private study, watching the storm with the detached calm of a man long accustomed to shutting out the world. At 45, Caleb had everything most people spent their lives chasing. His tech company had broken the 9-figure mark, his home had been featured in 2 architecture magazines, and his investments worked for him while he slept. But for all that, he lived in a vacuum. Since his divorce 6 years ago, he'd convinced himself that solitude was far preferable to the entanglements and emotional mess of human relationships. The knock at the door was so faint he nearly missed it beneath the drumming of the rain. Caleb frowned and glanced at the time, just after 9 at night. He wasn't expecting anyone. His housekeeper had left hours ago, and deliveries in this gated neighborhood never came this late. When the knock came again, this time firmer, he let out a weary sigh and set his tablet down. He made his way through the stillness of the house toward the front door, already rehearsing a polite but firm refusal for whatever solicitor had slipped past security. But the moment he opened the door, every word vanished from his mouth. A small girl, no older than 6, stood in the downpour. Her chestnut hair was soaked and plastered to her pale face, and a pair of faded pink pigtails drooped limply over her shoulders. She was barefoot, her legs muddy and scratched, and her flowered sundress clung to her tiny frame beneath a soaked beige cardigan. But it was her eyes, wide, terrified, glistening with tears blending into the rain, that made Caleb forget how to breathe. "Please," the little girl whispered, her voice shaking as she tried not to cry. "Please help us. They hurt my mommy. She's dying." Caleb stood frozen, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was hearing. This couldn't be real. Children didn't appear at the doors of million-dollar homes in the middle of thunderstorms, begging for help like something out of a movie. But the fear in her voice and the muddy footprints she left on his granite porch were as real as anything he'd ever known. "Where is your mom?" Caleb managed to ask, his voice low and strained. The girl turned and pointed toward the dense woods behind his property. "She told me to run and find someone. There were bad men. They hurt her, there was blood, and she wouldn't wake up." The words spilled out all at once, and something cracked deep inside Caleb's carefully built emotional walls. This child was in crisis, and for reasons beyond logic, she had ended up at his door. "What's your name?" he asked, kneeling down despite the rain soaking through his shirt. "Emma," she whispered. "Emma Foster. Please help her. She needs a doctor." His mind raced. Call emergency services, find her mother, bring the child somewhere safe. Be quick, but stay calm. Do not scare her more than she already was. "I'm going to help your mom, Emma," Caleb said gently, his voice steady. "But I need to call an ambulance and the police. Can you come inside where it's dry?" Emma shook her head violently, her lips trembling. "No. We have to go now. She's bleeding a lot. She said not to wait." Caleb pulled out his phone, dialing 911 as he led her through the entryway and toward the garage, grabbing his coat and car keys along the way. "This is Caleb Whitmore," he told the dispatcher. "I live on Ridgecrest Drive. A little girl just showed up at my door, says her mother's been attacked in the woods behind my house. She's injured, possibly critical. I'm going to find her. Send medics and law enforcement immediately." Without waiting for the dispatcher's advice to stay put, Caleb ended the call. Emma had already climbed into the passenger seat of his Range Rover, her tiny body shivering uncontrollably. "Which way?" he asked as he started the engine. Emma pointed down the gravel path toward the tree line. "We were camping by the creek. Mommy said it was safe, but those men found us." Caleb drove fast, his headlights cutting through the rain and dark. The narrow trail was slick and uneven, but he didn't slow down. Emma leaned forward against her seatbelt, scanning the woods. Suddenly she shouted, "Stop! Right there!" Caleb slammed the brakes, and before he could unbuckle, Emma had bolted from the car and disappeared into the dark trees. Swearing under his breath, he grabbed the flashlight from the emergency kit and chased after her, his shoes slipping in the mud. He found them about 30 yards in. A woman lay crumpled in the wet grass, her clothing torn, her blonde hair matted with blood. Emma knelt beside her, sobbing and shaking her shoulder. "Mommy, wake up. I brought someone. Mommy, please." Caleb dropped to his knees beside them, instinct and memory guiding him as he checked her vitals. She was alive, barely, her pulse was faint, her breathing shallow. Her head was bleeding badly, and bruises covered her arms and face. "Emma," he said, shrugging off his coat and laying it over the woman. "She's alive, but we need to keep her warm. Help is on the way. I promise." Emma nodded, her teeth chattering, her little hands clutching her mother's. "Can you tell me what happened?" Caleb asked softly, pressing a cloth to the wound on the woman's scalp. Between sobs, Emma explained that they'd been living out of their car for weeks after losing their apartment. Her mother had been looking for work, but nothing had come through. They had set up a tent by the creek to stay hidden and safe. But that night, 2 men had found them and demanded money. When her mom had nothing to give, they attacked her. "She told me to run," Emma whispered. "She said don't look back. Just find help. I saw your house with the lights on. I thought, maybe someone kind lived there." For the first time in years, Caleb felt tears sting the corners of his eyes. This little girl had been living in the woods, had watched her mother be beaten, and still found the courage to run through a storm to save her. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Caleb stayed kneeling in the mud, applying pressure to the wound while Emma held her mother's hand, whispering that everything was going to be okay. When the medics arrived, they worked quickly and carefully. The woman was lifted onto a stretcher, her body limp but breathing. One paramedic tried to gently separate Emma from her mother's side, but she clung to her with everything she had. "I want to go with her," she cried. Caleb stepped forward and put a hand on the medic's arm. "She's not going anywhere without her mother. I'll come too. I'll give a statement. Just don't take them apart." The medic hesitated, then nodded. As they loaded into the ambulance, Caleb climbed in behind them. For the first time in years, he was no longer alone. He did not know what the future would bring, but he knew one thing. He was going to make sure Emma and her mother would never be left out in the storm again. "I'll stay with her," Caleb heard himself say, the words coming out instinctively. "I'll take her to the hospital. She knows me now." The paramedic hesitated, glancing toward the officer who had arrived moments earlier. The officer gave a short nod. "We'll follow behind. We still need statements anyway." At the emergency room, Caleb sat stiffly in the corner of the triage waiting area, Emma curled up beside him beneath a hospital-issued blanket. Her small fingers wrapped tightly around his hand, refusing to let go. A nurse had cleaned up the cuts on her legs and offered a set of warm clothes, but Emma had flat-out refused to leave the waiting room until she knew her mother's condition. The minutes dragged. What felt like hours later, though it was likely just under an hour, a doctor finally appeared, clipboard in hand. "Family of Emma Foster?" she called out. Caleb stood up slowly and scooped Emma into his arms. "I'm with her," he said, his voice calm but taut with tension. The doctor gave him a quick, assessing glance, then softened. "Your mother is stable," she said, turning her attention to Emma. "She's going to be okay." Emma burst into tears again, but this time, they were tears of relief. Caleb held her closer, feeling the tight knot in his chest begin to loosen. "She's got a concussion, a few lacerations we stitched up, some deep bruises," the doctor continued. "But she's lucky. If she'd spent another hour out there in the cold and rain, it might have been a different story. She's been asking for her daughter." They followed the doctor down the hall to a small, sterile hospital room. On the bed lay a woman, freshly cleaned, with bandages on her arms and head, and in 4 in one arm. Her eyes found Emma instantly. A trembling hand reached out. "Sweetheart," she whispered, her voice hoarse but full of emotion. Emma clambered gently onto the bed, wrapping her arms around her mother. They held each other and cried, mother and daughter reunited after surviving something no child should ever experience. Caleb lingered awkwardly in the doorway, unsure if he should leave or stay. It felt wrong to intrude on this deeply personal moment. "Thank you," the woman said suddenly, her gaze rising to meet his over Emma's shoulder. Her voice shook. "The nurses told me They said you found us. That you helped Emma. Thank you for not turning her away. Anyone would have helped, Caleb replied automatically. But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. He lived in a neighborhood where people double-locked their doors and ignored unexpected knocks. Where strangers were problems to avoid, not people to assist. I'm Sarah, she said softly. Sarah Foster. I'm Caleb. Caleb Whitmore, he replied. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You don't need to, Caleb said quietly. I'm just grateful Emma found my house. A social worker appeared shortly after, clipboard in hand, her voice professional but not unkind. She began asking Sarah a series of questions about their living conditions, their family situation, financial status. Sarah answered with poise, explaining how she had lost her job, then their apartment. How she had struggled for weeks to keep Emma safe, sleeping in their car, then eventually hiding in the woods to avoid dangerous shelters. There are programs. Shelters, the social worker began. Sarah shook her head. I've been in shelters. Most of them are overcrowded. Some are just not safe. I couldn't risk Emma. I just needed a little more time to get on my feet. I was trying to find a job, stay connected, stay safe. I was doing everything I could. Caleb listened silently, watching Emma clutch her mother's arm, eyes full of quiet loyalty. Something shifted inside him, and before he could second-guess himself, he spoke. You can stay with me, he said simply, until you get things sorted out. I've got more room than I know what to do with, and it's all going unused anyway. Emma can have her own room. You can rest, recover, and take your time finding a job and somewhere stable. Sarah stared at him like he was speaking another language. Oh, we can't accept that, she said, her voice full of disbelief. You don't even know us. I know your daughter ran through a storm to save your life, Caleb said. I know you've done everything you could to protect her, to feed her, to keep her safe. And I know I have resources I'm not using, and you need help. Seems pretty straightforward to me. Why are you doing this? Sarah asked, her voice cracking as tears slid silently down her cheeks. Caleb thought about his cavernous home, all steel and silence, about the years he had spent building barriers and pushing people away. He thought about the sight of Emma's small form at his door, shaking in the rain, begging for someone to care. Because Emma knocked on my door tonight, he said softly. And I'm glad she did. 3 weeks later, Caleb walked into his house after a long day at the office and immediately noticed how different it felt. There was music coming from the kitchen. The smell of cookies baking drifted through the air. Emma was sitting at the counter, flour on her nose, while Sarah laughed and guided her through the next steps of the recipe. The fridge was covered in crayon drawings. A stack of children's books sat on the coffee table. And somewhere in the background, the sound of laughter, actual laughter, echoed through a home that had once known nothing but silence. Sarah had found a job at the local elementary school, working in the front office. She was saving up for her own place, always repeating that she didn't want to overstay their welcome. But Caleb found himself hoping she would not leave too soon. That Emma's curiosity and joy would continue filling his world with color. The men who attacked Sarah had been caught. She was healing, slowly but steadily. Emotionally, and though Emma still had nightmares from time to time, they were happening less often. Emma had taken to calling him Mr. Caleb. She had also declared herself the official decorator of the house, leaving glitter, stickers, and handmade crafts in her wake. And somehow, Caleb didn't mind. That night, over dinner at the kitchen table, Emma looked up at him with a serious expression. Mr. Caleb, she said slowly, do you know you saved my mom's life? Caleb smiled gently. I think you did, Emma. You were the brave one who went for help. But you opened the door, she replied. Mom said a lot of people wouldn't have done that. She says you've got a kind heart. Caleb swallowed hard. His eyes found Sarah's, and she held his gaze with an unreadable expression. You too gave me something too, he said quietly. You reminded me that having everything means nothing if you have no one to share it with. 6 months later, Sarah and Emma still lived in the west wing of Caleb's home. Not because they had nowhere else to go, but because somewhere along the way, they had become family. Caleb had fallen for Sarah, not just her beauty, but her strength, her kindness, her dignity. And Emma had completely stolen his heart, showing him that the best things in life cannot be bought, engineered, or locked away behind gates. Sometimes, the greatest blessings arrive disguised as trouble, as unexpected knocks in the middle of a storm, as desperate pleas from a child who believes someone out there is good enough to care. And sometimes, choosing to open that door, to choose compassion over convenience, doesn't just change one life. It changes them all. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe for more. And hey, share this video with a friend who loves a good story. See you in the next one.